You ever have that feeling when the woods are just too quiet? Like something is watching, but you can't see it? I used to think that was just paranoia. Not anymore. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Me, my best friend Danny, and his girlfriend Jess. We'd been camping since we were kids, so spending a couple of nights deep in the Appalachian woods wasn't a big deal. We wanted to get away from the noise of the world, drink some beers, tell stupid stories by the fire. Just us and nature. We hiked in about 6 miles away from the main trails right next to this old creek. The water was black under the trees, barely making a sound. It should have been peaceful. But from the start I had this unease. Like the forest was too still. No birds, no rustling branches, nothing. It felt like the whole place was holding its breath. Jess was the first to notice it. She nudged Danny and whispered, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" Danny laughed it off. "It's the woods, babe. Probably a deer or something." I wanted to believe that, but I couldn't shake the feeling crawling up my spine. As night fell, we set up camp and built a fire. The flickering light felt like the only thing keeping the dark at bay. We joked around, drank a little, tried to ignore that gnawing feeling of being observed. The wind picked up, making the trees groan like something was moving between them. Then we heard it. Not an animal, not a person. It was a whistle. Just 3 sharp notes, slow and deliberate, coming from the trees. Jess tensed up. "Who the hell is out there?" Danny stood up, shining his flashlight into the trees. "Hey, if someone's messing with us, it's not funny." Silence. Then another whistle. Closer, I grabbed my knife. "We should go," Danny scoffed. "Go where?" "It's probably just some hiker messing around." Jess wasn't buying it. She grabbed my arm, her fingers ice cold. That didn't sound human. Then the whistling stopped. We sat there, barely breathing, listening. Then came the footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Something moving through the brush just outside the fire's glow. It circled us, crunching leaves, breaking twigs. I shined my flashlight, but every time I turned, there was nothing. Just empty woods. Then Jess screamed. Danny and I spun around, but she wasn't looking at the woods, she was staring at the creek. The water had started moving, rippling like something huge was stirring underneath. I stepped closer. That's when I saw it. A shape, rising out of the water. It was tall, impossibly thin, like a man stretched too long. Its skin was black and slick, like rotting bark, and its eyes... God, its eyes. Hollow, but somehow watching. It stood there, dripping, unmoving. Then it raised a hand, long fingers with jagged, bony tips, and pointed at us. Jess grabbed Danny. "Run!" We bolted. We didn't even grab our gear, just ran blindly into the dark. The trees blurred past, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, the whistling started again, but this time it was all around us, coming from everywhere. We ran until our legs gave out, until the sound of the creek was gone, until the only thing we could hear was our own panicked breathing. Danny collapsed, clutching his chest. "What the hell was that?" An animal? A person?" Jess shook her head, sobbing. "No, that wasn't human." I didn't argue. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too afraid to move, too afraid to sleep. Every time the wind shifted, I swore I could hear something whispering, something close. By morning, we found the main trail and practically ran back to the car. But as we were leaving, I made the mistake of looking back. There, just beyond the tree line, was the creek. And standing in the water was it, watching. I haven't gone camping since. I don't think I ever will. Because sometimes when the wind is just right, I still hear the whistle. And I know it's still watching.
Story number 2.
I wish I never went back to those woods. I wish I had listened to my gut when it told me to stay away. But we always think we're safe, don't we? That the stories are just stories. That ghosts aren't real. I know better now. This happened last fall when my cousin Mark invited me on a camping trip deep in the Blackwater National Forest. It's one of those places with old legends, whispered warnings from the locals, stories of people disappearing, strange figures seen in the fog, voices calling your name when no one's there. But Mark, he didn't believe in any of that. Just superstitions, he said. So, like an idiot, I went with him. It was just the two of us and our friend Rob. We hiked out past the marked trails, deeper than most campers go. The air was thick with the smell of wet leaves, and the trees loomed overhead, blocking out the sky. It felt wrong, like the forest didn't want us there. The first night was quiet, but I barely slept. Something about the woods felt off. Too still, too heavy, like we weren't alone. I kept waking up to these faint sounds like footsteps in the distance. Not an animal, something bigger, something careful. The next day, we explored deeper. That's when we found the house. It was just standing there in a small clearing, half-rotted, swallowed by the forest. An old log cabin, the kind that shouldn't still be standing. The windows were broken, the door barely hanging onto its hinges. It reeked of mold and damp wood. Rob laughed. Looks like something out of a horror movie. I didn't laugh. I wanted to turn back, to leave it alone. But Mark, he was already pushing the door open. Come on, let's check it out. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the smell of decay. The floor was warped and covered in leaves, but there were still pieces of furniture, an old wooden table, a rocking chair in the corner. And then there was the journal. It was sitting on the table, open, its pages yellowed and brittle. Mark picked it up, flipping through the pages. Holy shit, this thing is old. I leaned over his shoulder and read. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. October 12th, 1889. The voices won't stop. They whisper my name, call from the trees. I see them in the fog. Watching. Always watching. I swallowed hard. Guys, we should go. Mark grinned. It's just an old journal, some guy scaring himself 100 years ago. Then Rob pointed. What's that? In the corner of the room, just past the rocking chair, was a door, smaller than the front door, made of old cracked wood. It was slightly open. A dark stairwell led down. A basement. I shook my head. No, absolutely not. Mark ignored me and stepped closer. Relax, it's probably empty. Then we heard it. A whisper. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. It came from below. Rob froze. Did you hear that? Mark hesitated for the first time. Yeah. He tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. Probably just the wind. Then the whisper came again. Louder. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't anything natural. It was a voice. A woman's voice. Calling. Begging. Help me. Rob bolted. He didn't say a word, just turned and ran out of the house. I was right behind him. Mark hesitated for just a second longer. Then the rocking chair moved. Not a little. Not from the wind. It rocked once hard like someone had just stood up. That's when Mark ran. We didn't stop until we were back at camp, out of breath, our hands shaking. None of us spoke. What could we say? That we heard a ghost? That something in that house wanted us? That night, the forest changed. The trees felt closer, the air heavier. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was waiting. And then, sometime after midnight, we heard it. The same voice. Soft. Faint. Help me. It came from the trees. Rob sat up, eyes wide. Tell me you heard that. I nodded, my heart pounding. Mark grabbed his flashlight and shined it toward the woods. Is someone there? The beam cut through the trees, illuminating the fog that had started creeping through the branches. Then we saw her. A figure, barely visible, standing just beyond the light. A woman in a long, tattered dress, her hair hanging over her face. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, watching. Then the whisper came again, but this time it was all around us. Help me, dozen voices. 100. Coming from the trees, from the fog, from the ground beneath us. Then the woman took a step forward. Mark dropped the flashlight. Run! We didn't grab anything, we just ran, sprinting blindly through the dark, branches cutting our faces, the whispers chasing us. Then Rob screamed. I turned just in time to see him hit the ground. He had tripped over something. No, not something. Someone. A hand, sticking out of the dirt, old, rotten, fingers curled as if reaching for him. Rob scrambled up, white as a sheet, and we ran harder. We ran until we saw the car. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. We just jumped in and tore down the dirt road, speeding out of those cursed woods. We never went back for our tents, never went back for anything. A week later, Mark called me. His voice was shaky. Dude, I looked up the area. There was a settlement near there in the late 1800s. The whole village vanished without a trace. No bodies. No signs of where they went. I didn't answer. I didn't want to know. That was months ago. I thought it was over. I thought I escaped. But sometimes at night, I wake up to whispers. Soft. Faint. Help me. And I know she's still watching. Waiting.
Story number 3.
I don't go camping anymore. Not after what happened that night in the Ozarks. It was supposed to be a weekend trip. Me, my older brother Eric, and our friend Josh. We'd been talking about it for weeks, planning the perfect backcountry escape. No cell service, no distractions. Just us, a campfire, and the deep, endless woods. We drove out early Saturday morning, leaving civilization behind as the road turned from asphalt to dirt, then to something barely wide enough for the truck. The trees swallowed us, growing taller, denser. By the time we parked and started hiking, I felt that first twinge of unease. The silence. I didn't notice it at first, too busy adjusting my pack and keeping up with the guys. But after an hour, it hit me. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our boots crunching leaves. It wasn't right. Eric laughed it off when I mentioned it. Dude, it's fall. The animals are quiet this time of year. Josh wasn't so. Still weird, though. We reached our campsite in the late afternoon, a perfect little clearing with a small stream nearby. The sky turned orange as we set up the tents and got the fire going. The silence had eased a little. There were occasional sounds now, branches creaking, distant rustling, but it still felt wrong. Then we found the tree. It was just beyond our camp, an old oak, twisted and gnarled, standing apart from the others. Its bark was stripped in places, deep claw-like marks dug into the wood, and at its base was a pile of bones, small ones. Animal, maybe, but clean, stripped bare. Arranged in strange little stacks. Josh muttered, "What the hell?" Eric kicked at them, probably some hunter messing around. But I noticed something else. There was something carved into the tree, faint, almost erased by time. Words. "Don't look at it." I swallowed hard. Look at what? That night, we sat around the fire, drinking, laughing, trying to shake off the weirdness. But as the hours dragged on, the forest seemed to close in. The shadows stretched longer, the trees feeling taller, pressing against the edges of the firelight. Then came the knocking. A single, sharp knock, somewhere in the woods. Josh turned his head. "You hear that?" Another knock. Closer. Eric stood up, grabbing the flashlight. Probably a deer. He swept the light across the trees, but there was nothing, just the darkness beyond the camp. Then 3 knocks, rapid and loud. Closer. Josh grabbed my arm. His hand was ice cold. "Dude, that's not an animal." Silence. Then the laughter started. Low at first. Soft, like a woman's voice, hidden in the wind. Then another, and another. Layers of laughter growing louder, circling us. Coming from the trees. Eric cursed, dropping the flashlight. "What the hell?" Then the fire went out. 1 second it was there, crackling, lighting up our faces. The next, darkness. Pitch black. Josh screamed. I scrambled for my phone, my hands shaking. When I clicked on the flashlight, I nearly dropped it. Something was standing at the edge of the clearing. Tall, thin, blacker than the night itself. No eyes, no face, just a long, stretched-out figure, its limbs wrong, too long. And it was watching us. Eric grabbed my arm. "Run!" We bolted. Crashed through the trees, branches clawing at us. The laughter followed, echoing, twisting, getting closer. Then Josh tripped. I turned, shining my phone's light on him. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, his face pale, his lips trembling. I turned, and there it was, right in front of me. Closer now. So close I could feel the cold radiating off of it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then it tilted its head, like it was curious. I did the only thing I could. I squeezed my eyes shut, and then silence. I don't know how long we stood there, but when I opened my eyes, it was gone. Eric yanked me to my feet. We didn't speak, didn't stop running. We found the truck, tore out of there like hell was chasing us. None of us said a word on the way home. But I haven't slept right since, and sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear it. The laughter, the knocking. I don't look. I never look.
Story number 4.
I never believed in ghosts. At least, not until the night we camped at Devil's Hollow. I grew up in West Virginia, surrounded by thick forests and old legends. My grandpa used to tell us stories about the Hollow, how people would hear voices in the woods, see strange figures moving between the trees, how campers disappeared, their tents found slashed open, their gear untouched. The woods don't like trespassers, he'd say. Something old lives there. I thought it was just folklore, until we went there ourselves. It was me, my older cousin Jake, and my best friend Tyler. We were all in our 20s, old enough to laugh at ghost stories, but young enough to still chase a thrill. Jake was the one who suggested it. If we really want to camp somewhere creepy, let's hit Devil's Hollow. Tyler hesitated. Man, people say that place is cursed. Jake scoffed. People are idiots. And just like that, we were going. We drove out on a chilly October afternoon, packed heavy with beer, flashlights, and a couple of knives. Just in case. The deeper we got into the forest, the quieter it became. It was that eerie kind of quiet, like the trees were listening. We hiked for miles until we found a clearing near a dried-up creek bed. It looked perfect, flat, open, and surrounded by towering oaks. We set up camp, built a fire, and cracked open some beers, talking about work, life, anything to push away that creeping unease. Then, as the sun started setting, Tyler frowned. "You guys notice something weird?" I listened. The forest was still, too still. No birds, no wind, not even the distant rustling of an animal. Jake waved him off. It's just your imagination, man. I wasn't so sure. As darkness swallowed the trees, we sat close to the fire, the flames casting long, shifting shadows. That's when we heard it. A whisper. Faint, coming from the trees. Tyler tensed. Did you hear that? I nodded. Jake scoffed, but I saw the way his fingers tightened around his beer can. Then it came again. A woman's voice, soft and sad. Help me. Tyler cursed. Nope, I'm not doing this. Jake stood, shining his flashlight toward the woods. If someone's messing with us, you better come out now. Silence. Then, in the distance, something moved. Branches snapped. A shadow flickered between the trees. I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding. Then we saw it. A figure, tall, thin, draped in something tattered and white. It stood just beyond the reach of our firelight, motionless, watching us. Tyler whispered, Jesus Christ. Jake swallowed. It's just some crazy hiker, right? Then the figure moved, not like a person. It glided, smooth, silent, closer. The fire flickered violently, like the air around us had turned ice cold. Then the whisper came again, help me. Right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just empty night. Tyler grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. Jake hesitated. But then the whisper changed. It wasn't pleading anymore. It was laughing. Low, mocking, growing louder, coming from everywhere. Then something screamed. A high-pitched, bone-chilling shriek that sent my stomach into my throat. We ran. Didn't grab our gear. Didn't even look back. Just ran blindly into the dark, crashing through branches, lungs burning. The laughter followed us, weaving through the trees, never too far behind. Then the sound stopped. I skidded to a halt, chest heaving, flashlight trembling in my grip. Tyler and Jake stood beside me, pale as death. The woods were silent again, but ahead of us, our campsite. I froze. That wasn't possible. We had been running away from it. But there it was. The fire was still burning, our tents exactly where we left them. Jake whispered, "What the hell?" Then the laughter came again, and something stepped out of my tent. I felt my breath stop. It was me, my own face, my own clothes, standing there, smiling. But the eyes were wrong. Black. Empty. It tilted its head and whispered, "Help me." I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. All I know is that we made it back to the truck, peeling out of there so fast we almost crashed. We never went back for our gear, never spoke about it again. But sometimes at night I hear it. The whisper. The laughter. And I see myself standing in the shadows, smiling, waiting.
Story number 5.
I don't tell this story often. Most people don't believe me. Hell, sometimes I don't even believe it myself. But it happened, and I'll never set foot in those woods again. It was late October, right before Halloween, when my friend Nate convinced me and our buddy Lucas to go on a camping trip. We'd done a lot of backwoods camping before, but this time, Nate wanted to try somewhere new. I found this old trail online, he said. Barely anyone hikes it anymore. It used to lead to a town, but the place got abandoned like 100 years ago. Lucas and I exchanged a look. An abandoned town in the middle of nowhere? I asked. Nate grinned. Come on, it'll be badass. We'll be the only ones out there. That part turned out to be true. The drive took us deep into the Virginia mountains, past towns that barely had gas stations, past signs warning about poor road conditions. By the time we parked near the trailhead, the sun was already starting to set. The hike was supposed to take 2 hours, but the trail was almost non-existent, overgrown, barely marked. The deeper we went, the more uneasy I felt. No birds, no animals, just the wind, rattling through the dead branches like something whispering. An hour in, Lucas stopped. Guys, look at this. We turned. He was pointing at something barely visible beneath the weeds and fallen leaves. A foundation. Just a cracked stone outline of a house, long since rotted away. There were more ahead, disappearing into the trees, silent remains of the abandoned town. Guess we made it, Nate said, trying to sound excited. I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be there. But we set up camp in the middle of the ruins, right next to what looked like an old well. The stone was covered in moss, the hole itself gaping and black. It gave me the creeps, but I didn't say anything. We built a fire, drank a little, told dumb horror stories, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed too dark around us. Then, just past midnight, we heard it. A bell. Faint, distant, echoing through the trees. I sat up, my skin crawling. Did you guys hear that? Lucas nodded, his face pale. Nate frowned. That's weird. There's no churches out here, right? Then the bell rang again. Closer. The fire flickered violently as if something had sucked the warmth from the air. Then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, moving along the ruined foundations, circling us, I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding. No answer. Then the footsteps stopped. Right behind me. I turned, shining my light toward the well, and I saw it. A figure. Tall. Dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothes. The skin was gray, sagging, stretched too tight over its bones. And its eyes. God. Its eyes. Black. It opened its mouth, too wide, like its jaw was unhinged. Then it screamed. A sound like rusted metal. Like 100 voices shrieking at once. The fire died. We ran, crashing through the darkness, branches tearing at our faces, the bell still ringing. The ruins blurred past us, the woods twisted, endless, the trail gone. Then Lucas tripped. I turned just in time to see him hit the ground. He pushed himself up, but then something grabbed his ankle. A hand, grayed, rotten, fingers too long, curling around his leg. He screamed, kicking wildly, breaking free. We didn't stop running until we saw the car. We dove in, locked the doors, and tore down the dirt road. No one spoke the entire way back. When we finally stopped at a gas station hours later, Nate pulled out his phone and started searching. After a while, he looked up, face pale. "The town didn't just get abandoned," he said. "It burned. A church caught fire during a service. The bell collapsed on top of them. They say no one made it out." Lucas shuddered. "Then what the hell was that thing?" I didn't answer because I already knew. It was waiting. And when I close my eyes at night, sometimes I still hear the bell, ringing, calling me back.
Story number 6.
I should have listened to my grandfather. He always warned us about those woods, about the old hunting ground deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the trees grew too close together, where the silence stretched too long. "Stay out of the Black Hollow," he'd say, his voice firm, his usually kind dark, with something unspoken. Things live there. Things that don't like to be disturbed. But of course, I didn't listen. It was supposed to be a weekend trip, me, my cousin Danny, and our friend Will. We all grew up hiking and camping, and we wanted to go somewhere new, somewhere remote. Will had heard about Black Hollow from some guy at a bar, said it was untouched wilderness. "Not many people go there anymore," the guy had said. "Not since the disappearances." We laughed it off. Just ghost stories, right? So early Saturday morning, we packed up our gear and drove out. The road ended miles from where we planned to camp, forcing us to hike through dense forest, the air thick with the smell of damp leaves and moss. It didn't take long before I started feeling it. That wrongness. It wasn't just the quiet, though that was bad enough. No birds, no squirrels, no insects buzzing. Just our boots crunching against the earth. It was the way the trees seemed too close, like they had shifted when we weren't looking. Like they were watching. Danny must have felt it too, because after a while he muttered, "This place is weird, man." Will scoffed. "You guys are just creeped out because some old dude told you a scary story." I wanted to believe him. I really did. By late afternoon, we found a small clearing and set up camp. The sun barely reached through the canopy, leaving everything in a dim, grayish-green haze. As we built a fire, I noticed something. There were no fallen branches, no dead trees, no signs of decay. Like the forest never let anything rot, like it never let anything die. That should have been the first sign. The second came just after dark. We were sitting around the fire, drinking, laughing, when Danny stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. "Did you hear that?" I froze. A sound drifted through the trees. Soft. Almost too faint to notice. A voice. A woman's voice. "Help me." Will frowned. That sounded far away. Danny shook his head. "No, man. That sounded close." I shined my flashlight toward the trees. The beam barely cut through the darkness. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone out there?" Silence. Then crunch. A footstep. Right behind us. We all spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, standing too still, too silent. Danny's breathing grew shaky. "We should leave. We should leave." Will forced a laugh. "Dude, we're in the middle of nowhere. Sound carries weird in the woods." Then the voice came again. "Help me." Only this time, it was closer, right behind my ear. I jumped up, spinning, my flashlight shaking in my hands. No one there. The fire flickered violently, as if something had sucked the air from the clearing. Danny grabbed his pack. "Screw this. I'm not staying." I didn't argue. Then we saw them. Figures, standing just beyond the firelight. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. Tall, thin, their bodies blending into the trees. Their faces, if they had faces, hidden in shadow. And there were dozens of them. My throat locked up. Will made a choking sound, scrambling backward. "What the hell?" Then they moved, not walking, gliding, closing in. The fire dimmed, shrinking smaller until only embers remained. Then the whispers started. Help me, help me. Layered voices, high and low, male and female, mocking. Then silence. I don't remember running. I just remember falling. Crashing through the dark, my breath ragged, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Somewhere behind me, I heard Danny screaming. Then Will, then nothing. I woke up to pale morning light filtering through the trees. My body ached, covered in scrapes and bruises. I was alone. No campsite, no fire pit, no Danny, no Will. I stumbled back toward the trailhead, my legs barely carrying me. I don't know how long I walked before I reached the road, but when I did, my car was gone, and so was the trail. Like it had never been there at all. It's been 3 years. They never found Danny or Will, never found anything. When I told the police what happened, they looked at me like I was crazy. No record of a town called Black Hollow, no hiking trails in that area, no disappearances, like the forest had erased them, like it had almost erased me. Sometimes, at night, I wake up to whispers. Help me. And I know they're still out there, waiting.
Story number 7.
I never should have gone back to Cold Creek. It was an old ghost town, swallowed by the forest deep in the Montana wilderness. My dad used to tell me stories about it when I was a kid, how it was once a booming mining town until something happened. Something bad. The official story? The mine collapsed in 1893, killing nearly every worker inside. After that, the town withered and the survivors left. But locals whispered something else. They said the mine didn't just collapse. They said something came out. I was 24 when I went back. It was supposed to be a research trip, just me, my girlfriend Emily, and my best friend Mark. Emily was a photographer, always chasing eerie, forgotten places, and Mark was the kind of guy who never backed down from a challenge. We planned to camp near the town, explore a bit, take some photos, and be back before dark. Simple, right? We had no idea what we were walking into. The hike was brutal. The trail was barely marked, the trees growing too thick, the air unnaturally still. It was like stepping into a world where time had stopped. Then we found it. Cold Creek. The town sat in a valley, swallowed by the forest, rotting wooden buildings slumped against each other. The old saloon, a collapsed church, the skeletal remains of houses long abandoned. And in the distance, carved into the mountain, was the entrance to the mine. Emily was already snapping photos, but I felt off, like we were being watched. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. Dude, lighten up. It's just an old ghost town. I forced a laugh. Yeah, right. But the deeper we went, the worse it got. It was the silence. Not just quiet. Wrong. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, no wind. Just nothing. Then Emily called out, "Guys, look at this." She was standing in front of the old church. The door was barely hanging on its rusted hinges. Above it, carved into the wood, were the words, "We locked it in." A chill ran down my spine. Emily snapped a picture. Creepy, but probably just some prank. Then we heard it. A whisper, faint, coming from the mine. I turned. My mouth went dry. The entrance yawned open like a mouth in the mountainside, blacker than black. The wooden beams holding it up were splintered, half collapsed. And deep inside, something moved. A shadow, shifting, watching. Mark laughed, but it was nervous. Wind, probably. Emily lowered her camera. Guys, I don't think we should be here. Then the bell rang, a deep, rusted clang. We all jumped, spinning toward the church. The bell tower stood silent, rotting. Mark swallowed. That wasn't real, right? Then, footsteps. Slow, coming from the mine. Emily grabbed my arm. Let's go now. Mark hesitated, but then we saw it. Something stepped out of the mine, tall. Too tall. Its body twisted, wrapped in tattered cloth. Its limbs were wrong, jagged, bent at unnatural angles. And its face... oh, God. It didn't have one. Just a hole, a black gaping pit where its face should be. And when it opened its mouth, I heard them. The screams. Hundreds of voices trapped inside, wailing. Mark grabbed my arm. Run. We tore through the town, vaulting over broken fences, kicking up dust. But the thing followed. It didn't run. It didn't need to. It just glided, its limbs twitching, its mouth still screaming. Then Emily tripped. She hit the ground hard, her camera smashing beside her. I turned back. Emily, she looked up, her face pale, eyes wide. Behind you. I didn't want to look, but I did. And it was right there, inches from my face. The hole where its mouth should be opened wider. And I felt something pulling at me. Something cold. Something hungry. Emily grabbed my hand, yanking me to my feet. We ran faster than I ever thought possible. The town blurred past us, the trees closed in, the whispers, the screams, the bell, all of it chasing us. Then suddenly, silence. We reached the truck, breathless, shaking. The town was gone, not just far behind us. Gone. The trees stretched endlessly, no sign of Cold Creek, no ruins, no mine, like it had never been there at all. That was a year ago. We don't talk about it. Mark refuses to acknowledge it ever happened. Emily deleted all her photos from that day. But sometimes late at night her phone rings. No number, no caller ID, just static. And buried beneath it, so faint it's almost lost in the noise. A scream.
Story number 8.
I know people won't believe me. Hell, I hardly believe it myself, but something followed me out of those woods. It started as a weekend camping trip. Me, my brother Eric, and his girlfriend Sam. We wanted to get away from everything for a while, unplug, spend a couple of nights under the stars. Eric found the spot, a remote stretch of forest deep in Oregon, miles from the nearest road. He said he read about it on a forum, some old trail barely anyone used anymore. That should have been the first red flag. We packed light and set out early. The first few miles were fine, quiet, peaceful even, but the deeper we went, the weirder it felt. Like we weren't alone, like something was watching. I tried to shake it off, but Sam must have felt it too because after a while she whispered, "Is it just me or is it too quiet?" She was right. No birds, no wind, just our footsteps crunching through the leaves. Then Eric found the clearing. It was perfect, a wide, flat patch of earth surrounded by towering pine trees. A small river trickled nearby, reflecting the last bit of daylight, but something was off. The ground was wrong. No grass, no leaves, just bare dirt like nothing had grown there for a long, long time. And in the center, half buried in the soil, a wooden mask. Carved, old, split down the middle. Eric picked it up. Damn, looks handmade. Sam shuddered. Leave it alone. Eric laughed. It's just a mask. But I saw the way the trees leaned in around us, like they were listening. By nightfall, the feeling hadn't gone away. We built a fire, cooked some food, tried to ignore the unease gnawing at the edges of our minds. But the silence was wrong, and then the whispering started. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I realized it was voices. Low, faint, speaking a language I didn't recognize. "Do you hear that?" Sam whispered. Eric poked at the fire. "It's probably just the trees." Then something laughed, not close, not far, just around us. Eric stood, shining his flashlight into the trees. "Hello?" No answer, just the wind picking up, rattling the branches like bones. Then a shadow moved. I caught it from the corner of my eye. Tall, too tall, standing just beyond the firelight, watching. "We need to go," Sam whispered. Eric hesitated. "Come on, guys, it's just our imaginations." Then the laughter came again. Closer this time, the mask, the one Eric had picked up, was now sitting beside the fire, right where he had been sitting. Only now it wasn't broken. It was whole, and its eye sockets were bleeding. I don't remember screaming. I just remember running. We didn't pack, didn't grab our gear, just tore through the woods, branches clawing at our faces, the laughter chasing us. Then Eric tripped. He hit the ground hard, groaning. Sam and I turned back to help him. And that's when I saw it, standing between the trees, its body twisted, its head tilted too far to one side, and its face, it was wearing the mask. Only now the mask was smiling. I grabbed Eric, yanked him to his feet. We ran until we saw the road, and then nothing. The woods behind us were still, like nothing had happened, like nothing had ever been there. We made it home. Didn't talk about it, didn't tell anyone. Eric wouldn't answer my calls after that. And then a week later, he was gone. Vanished. His car still in his driveway, his phone on his nightstand, but gone. The only thing they found, a wooden mask, sitting on his pillow, smiling, waiting. I still hear the laughter, late at night, in the dark corners of my room, and sometimes I see the mask, watching, waiting, for me.
Story number 9.
I don't go camping anymore, not after what happened in Raven's Hollow. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just me, my cousin Jake, and our friend Mason. We had been camping together for years, exploring deep into the forests of West Virginia, looking for places no one had been in a long time. Jake was the one who found Raven's Hollow. Old mining land, he said. Completely abandoned. No trails, no campsites, just us and the wild. Mason grinned. Sounds perfect. I should have known better. The hike was rough, miles of unmarked forest, climbing over fallen trees and through patches of fog that never seemed to lift. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, like the woods were holding their breath. After a few hours, we found it. Raven's Hollow. The valley stretched before us, thick with mist. Rotten wooden structures jutted out from the earth, old mining sheds, rusted carts, broken down equipment, and in the center, a shaft entrance. The mine. Its opening was wide, dark, and waiting. I shivered. Creepy as hell, Mason muttered. Jake laughed. It's just a hole in the ground, but I noticed something. The trees around the mine, they were wrong, dead, twisted, bark split open like screaming mouths. And then I saw the symbols carved deep into the wood circling the mine entrance. Not words, not anything I recognized. But they felt old, like warnings. Let's set up camp, Jake said. I wanted to leave, but I didn't. I should have. Night fell fast in the hollow, too fast. 1 minute, the sun was filtering through the trees. The next, it was pitch black. We built a fire, trying to shake the unease that had settled in our chests. Then the knocking started, soft, rhythmic, from deep inside the mine. Mason looked up. Did you hear that? Jake frowned. Probably just water dripping. But it wasn't water, because the knocking turned into footsteps, slow, dragging, coming closer. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the mine entrance. Nothing there, just blackness. A yawning, endless void. Then Mason whispered, Guys, someone's out there. I turned, my stomach nodding. Beyond the firelight in the trees, a figure, tall, thin, standing perfectly still, watching. Jake stood. Hey, who's there? No answer. The fire flickered, dimmed, like something was sucking the warmth from the air. And then the figure moved. Not stepping, not walking, just gliding closer. Slow, silent, my breath locked in my throat. Then a whisper, right behind me. You shouldn't be here. I spun. No one there. The fire died, and the screaming started, not from us, from the mine. Hundreds of voices, wailing, sobbing, pleading, and above them a single ragged breath, like something breathing us in. Then footsteps, not from the mine, from everywhere, the woods, the darkness, surrounding us. We ran. I don't remember how we got out, just flashes, twisted trees, the sound of laughter echoing through the mist, shadows moving between the trees. When we reached the road, Mason collapsed, gasping. Jake turned back, his face pale. Did you see them? I didn't answer, because I already knew. They saw us first. We never spoke about it again, never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the knocking, soft, rhythmic, waiting.
Story number 10.
I know I shouldn't have gone back to Widow's Peak, but some places don't let you go. When I was a kid, my parents used to take me camping in the mountains of North Carolina, right near a place called Widow's Peak. It wasn't an official campground, just an old clearing in the woods, way off the beaten path. My dad loved it because no one else ever camped there. I know why now. The last time we went, I was 11. It was the middle of the night when I woke up needing to pee. My dad had always told me never to go too far from the tent, but that night, something called me. A whisper, soft, almost like my mother's voice. I don't remember walking. I just remember waking up, standing at the edge of the trees, looking into the darkest part of the forest. And there between the trees was a woman, dressed in black, her skin pale as the moon, her eyes missing. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched. And then she smiled. I screamed. My dad found me minutes later, curled up on the ground, shaking. We packed up and left before dawn. I never went back. Not until last year. I was 26 when my friend Caleb brought up Widow's Peak. There's an old legend about that place, he said. Some woman who lost her husband in the war, they say she went mad, started luring men into the woods, and none of them ever came back. I didn't tell him I had seen her, but when he suggested we go camping there, I should have said no. I didn't. It was me, Caleb, and his girlfriend Anna. We hiked deep into the woods, following an old hunting trail until we found the clearing. Widow's Peak. Nothing had changed. The trees stood too tall, too still. No birds, no insects. Just silence. Anna shivered. This place is creepy. She was right. We set up camp as the sun dipped low, its last rays stretching through the trees like fingers. By nightfall, the fire was the only light for miles, and then the whispers started. Soft, distant. Anna sat up. Did you hear that? Caleb laughed. Probably just the wind. But it wasn't the wind, because the whispers became words. Come closer. Come see. Then the footsteps. Not from around us, from inside the tent. Anna screamed. The tent collapsed, something moving inside it, shifting, stretching, too long to be human. We tore our way out, gasping for air, scrambling to our feet, and then we saw her, standing just beyond the fire, black dress, pale skin, empty eye, smiling, and her mouth kept moving, whispering, but the words weren't hers. They were my mother's. "Come here, baby. Come to me." I felt myself stepping forward. Caleb grabbed me. "What the hell are you doing?" The fire died, and suddenly we weren't in the clearing anymore. The trees had closed in. The sky was gone. The ground beneath us was graves, and the woman was everywhere, behind the trees, between the branches, whispering. I don't remember running, I don't remember leaving, but somehow we woke up miles away, drenched in morning dew, covered in scratches, our ears still ringing with her voice. We never spoke of it again, but last week Caleb disappeared. His car was found near Widow's Peak, and in the passenger seat was a black dress, waiting.